The finale of The Mandalorian Season 3 is out, and I don't really know how to feel about it, but I do have a lot to say. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be breaking down the finale of Mandalorian Season 3. Before we get started, if you guys could just leave a like on this video and comment down below what you thought, I would really appreciate it. You know I always read the comments and I will most likely respond. We're going to break down the episode per usual and then I'm going to give my thoughts. This episode starts off right where the last episode ended and we see the Mandalorians trying to escape on Mandalore from the Imperial forces. And right away, we get some amazing combat, and let me tell you, my favorite part about this episode is not only the combat and the choreography, but the visuals in general. While there were moments in the plot and overall story that I don't necessarily fully align with, and I don't really think it's a good thing, I do think many of the great things that have come from this season have been from the visual department. And this episode is no exception. We see this great moment between Din Djarin and Grogu where Din tells him that he needs Grogu to be brave for him, and this kind of preps you thinking maybe this might be the last time we see these two together for a while. And there were rumors before this episode came out that Din was possibly going to die in this episode, but I won't spoil anything till later on. The episode then actually starts and everything is in complete chaos. We see the Imperials fighting the Mandalorians and vice versa. Moff Gideon is actually tracking Din and Grogu through his holo map on the base, but I don't really understand this because, well, why doesn't he just stop them there? This episode does have a lot of plot holes. If you really look beyond the surface, there's some things that just don't make sense. But again, it's Star Wars, it's something that's goofy in general, so I don't necessarily think that this is too big of an issue. There's another one actually where we see all of these TIE fighters launch, and then we kind of just don't see them for the rest of the episode. But of course, it's covered by awesome moments of action and storytelling, which I do think covers that part up at least. One of the coolest parts of this episode actually happens right after this, where Din is telling R5 to help him get to the command center. This reminded me a lot of R2-D2's scene in Revenge of the Sith, where Anakin is telling R2 to control the elevators. This is like the same thing that's going on here with R5. He has to defend himself from multiple droids, etc., and I thought it was a really good callback. Din and Bo basically call up to the Mandalorian control ship that is basically the reprinted Imperial ship and tells them, look, we need all the help we can get because the forces down here are too strong. We see Axe Woves take out a ton of ships, a ton of TIE fighters and stormtroopers, and this stuff is movie quality. If there is nothing else you should take away from this season, it's the fact that this has been movie quality, not a TV show. Even though it is a TV show. It got the budget that it deserved, and I really think it really paid off, giving the visual effects department and all of the other sort of visual elements the really big oomph that it needed. Now, a good thing about this episode is the fact that it is a finale, so it doesn't really slow down. It's action-packed from start to finish, and I was really worried about this because episodes leading up to the finale have been sort of slow, and we didn't really get any sort of plot development / big picture things until last week. Because if you think about it, Moff Gideon just returned last week and now we're at the finale. We didn't really have any time to get with him, understand his motivations, etc. He just kind of seems like a guy who wants to take power and control over everything. Really generic villain type things. We get an awesome action sequence between Din and the stormtroopers in the red laser guard room, which is totally reminiscent of Phantom Menace. Once they get past those lasers, Din and Grogu see a room full of vats. And in these vats are the cloned body of not Snoke, not Palpatine, but Moff Gideon. If we look back into previous seasons, especially the episode in season 2 where they go to the Imperial base and find the clones, these guys looked nothing like Moff Gideon, and I think it's kind of strange how they've sort of done a 180, because in that season 2 episode, we actually hear Snoke's theme playing over that when they're looking at it. Maybe there is more cloning going on, but it's definitely not what's happening here. Here we see a bunch of Moff Gideons. I just thought it was sort of an odd choice, and not only do we see them for a second, they also just go away in 1 second. Grogu looks into one of the vats, and Moff Gideon's clone looks right at Grogu, and then Din sort of just blows them all up. A cool addition, but it kind of seems pointless because they were in the show for maybe 20 seconds. And then you start to think, why is Moff Gideon cloning himself? What does he want to do here? Is he just trying to make more of himself so he can live on and not die? We then get our first pace break in the episode and we travel with Bo-Katan and the rest of the Mandalorians to an underground garden. Now this is beautiful and I feel like this is something Sabine really would appreciate, because she is Mandalorian as well. But just seeing the regrowth of the fauna and the vegetation on Mandalore is really symbolic of what this group has gone through this season. I said it last week, but this season really isn't about Din and Grogu anymore. It's about the Mandalorian as a people. And this garden growing over the rubble is very symbolic of the group forming back together. We then get the most incredible space battle that I've seen in recent years from Star Wars. We see all the Mandalorians jetting down from the sky, fighting the Imperials, and it was just magnificent. We also get Bo-Katan giving her sort of Captain America moment with the darksaber and her shield leading the charge, and I thought that was really cool. Now, I know I said multiple times that we couldn't really trust Bo-Katan, but I guess she's fine. And don't get me wrong, I love her as a character, but I think we're really missing that dark-sided edge that I thought she may have had. But if she's fully good and she's fully faithful to all of the Mandalorians, I'm all for it. And I think she actually is, considering what happens later on in this episode. Going forward, I would love to see another series just with Bo-Katan because she is amazing when it comes to action, and her dialogue is actually great as well. And most of the storytelling from this season has come from her, not necessarily from our titular character. But yeah, just seeing all of the Mandalorians using their jetpacks, using their weaponry to fight these Imperial stormtroopers was incredible. This season got action right 100%. So then we cut back to Din and Moff Gideon has found them, but it's weird because if we call back to literally 10 minutes ago in the episode, he knew exactly where they were when he was tracking them, so that doesn't really make sense, but anyway, I digress. Moff Gideon gives his first really big emotional push. He's been very emotionless in the past, very cutthroat, very serious, but here he yells at Din saying, "You've destroyed my clones. Why did you do that? They didn't even get a chance to breathe," etc. We find out now that the reason he made these clones is because they could have something that Moff Gideon didn't. And of course, that thing is the Force. Now, this is a really sticky area because we remember back in season 1, the whole reason for capturing Grogu, the whole reason Moff Gideon wanted him in the first place was to harvest his blood, to harvest his energy so he could transfer his Force abilities into something, and we now know what that something is. Clearly, this leads to the sequel trilogy and what happens with the return of Palpatine and Snoke, but it just seems sort of abrupt and sort of fast here. Moff Gideon is pissed. He is so mad at Din, and of course, they have a battle. I have to say again, Moff Gideon's suit looks so good, and I love the horns on his helmet. They don't necessarily call back to Mandalorians or Darth Maul at all, but it's sort of implied that maybe he had some affiliation with him. And we also have to remember that this isn't just a Beskar suit. This is more of a Death Trooper style Iron Man suit made of Beskar. So he's extremely strong. We see Din Djarin get attacked by the Praetorian guards and really taken advantage of, and then Grogu sort of saves the day but gets himself sort of captured at the same time. And I love the emotion that Pedro Pascal's voice gives here to Grogu when he's getting taken away. It really seems like a fatherly yelp, a cry for help to save his child. It was a really short line, really quick, but it was super effective. Of course, Bo-Katan and the Night Owls swoop in to save the day and they start attacking the Praetorian guards. And I'll say it one last time, the fight sequences in here were fantastic and was just total eye candy. I loved every minute of it and I thought it was done super well. We actually see Grogu get to do some Force tricks here. He flips over the lights, does some Force pushing. He's really starting to hone in on his skills and not necessarily doing things one-off or every once in a while. He seems like he actually is starting to have control over all of this stuff. Bo-Katan saves the day and we finally get to see Bo-Katan battle Moff Gideon with the darksaber. And just for some context, this is after Din and Grogu are sort of separate from Moff Gideon. Moff Gideon's fighting Bo-Katan, and Din and Grogu are fighting the Praetorian guards. After a few minutes of battle, they really drag it out a while, which I like because, the longer the fight sequences are, the better, in my opinion. We see Moff Gideon grab the darksaber inside of Bo-Katan's hand and crush it. Now, if we call back to a previous season, we remember Din Djarin saying when he first sees the darksaber that it's made out of some sort of special kind of Beskar that he's never seen before. But I guess since Moff Gideon's got this Beskar suit, it's Beskar against Beskar, so he's able to just crush it. And that's it. That's the end of the darksaber. And I don't really think I like this because it's such a symbolic thing for the Mandalorian people. But on the other side, I can see this as sort of an evolution of the Mandalorian people because we no longer need this silly little trinket or totem to determine who controls this group of people. So no, I don't like it because I think it's an iconic weapon and I don't think we've seen Din or Bo use it as much as we'd want to, but I also understand the reason of getting rid of it because of the symbolic elements. And that's not to say that the darksaber can't return. I'm sure it can come back one day. But for now, yeah, it's completely broken. Now we see the Mandalorian ship that Axe Woves is piloting is going down. Bo-Katan, with the help of Grogu and Din, are able to escape Moff Gideon's clutches, but the ship that's coming down is about to blow everything up. This massive fireball ensues, completely engulfing Moff Gideon and totally decimating him. But if we remember, Din, Grogu, and Bo-Katan are all there at the same time. And my total favorite, 100% absolute must-see scene from this episode happens right here, where Grogu makes the Force shield with the Force. This is a huge callback to Rebels, where Kanan Jarrus does this similar thing, and I won't spoil what happens in Rebels in case you haven't seen it, but it's super powerful and one of the best moments in Rebels as a whole, and I'm super glad that Grogu has the ability to do the same thing that Kanan has. We also just get this epic shot of Grogu, Din, and Bo-Katan standing there like father, mother, and son. And conflict resolved, I guess. We move back to the living waters of Mandalore, where we see the Great Forge reignited. And this is sort of the full circle moment that I've been waiting for a while, because we actually see the Mandalorian people group back together and become one whole unit again. And Axe Wove's saying for Mandalore was just great. It was probably the best line delivery in the whole episode. We see Paz Vizsla's son Ragnar getting sort of doused in the living waters and accepting the creed. And after this, we actually see Din adopt Grogu. Now, maybe this is the teary-eyed moment that one of the people who worked on this show referenced and said that we were going to have tears in our eyes, we were going to need tissues, etc. I was expecting somebody to die, but it was a really sweet moment seeing Din formally adopt Grogu as a youngling or slash Padawan slash apprentice slash child. Grogu looks down into the living waters, and then I remembered, wait a minute, we teased the mythosaur back in episode 2. There was supposed to be this huge payoff, hopefully, in the giant action sequences for the finale, but they do a wipe here, so it seems like it's sort of added on top of everything. It's not necessarily something that was originally in the script. It wipes through to the underwater scene where we see the mythosaur wake up, and that's about it. We see Bo-Katan reignite the Forge, unite her people, and then we flip back over to Din and Grogu, who have made it back to the New Republic. And I also have to point out here that Grogu's new name is now Din Grogu. So I guess Din Djarin's first name is Djarin. It's not necessarily Din. I do like how Din Grogu sounds, but I just think it's interesting how, you have Paz Vizsla of House Vizsla, Bo-Katan Kryze of House Kryze, but now you have Din Djarin of House Din? I don't know, maybe they'll explain it later, but I do like how it sounds. Din Grogu does sound good, in my opinion. I do think it sounds better than Grogu Djarin. Din Djarin is talking to Carson Teva and basically wants to keep him on retainer for the New Republic. This sort of reminded me of what the Bad Batch was doing with Sid in Season 2, and I hope we get some meaningful side quests, some meaningful missions out of this, because we know after this, it's just going to be Din and Grogu on their own again, like it was in the first 2 seasons. And I think that's for the best. We travel back to Navarro, where Greef Karga has given Din Djarin and Grogu a place to live, a sort of homestead. Greef Karga has reinstated IG-11 as the town marshal for Navarro, and I don't know if I like this because, IG-11 was the big sacrifice of Season 1, and then the big sacrifice of Season 2 was Din and Grogu getting separated, and now at the end of Season 3, those sacrifices don't necessarily mean anything because they're back to normal. There's just some sort of flip-flopping and disconnection between these points that I don't necessarily think really wrap up the story all that well. But overall, it's a happy ending. We see Grogu and Din on their own, in their own house, hanging out, and it's a very happy ending. Again, I love happy endings. I think they're great. I'd rather have a happy, complete ending than a cliffhanger where we have to wait several years to find out if anything pays off. But I can't help but feel that this sort of fell flat because this whole season sort of dragged out and didn't necessarily know what it was. I love this series, and I'm definitely not going to stop watching anything new coming from Star Wars, but I have to point out that I think that this season was definitely a little bit lackluster in comparison to previous seasons. Now, I'm a Star Wars super fan. I don't know everything, but I do think I know a good amount, and I do hope that they take what they learned from this season and make it better, and I will be right there on day one. We have Ahsoka to look forward to after this, and I know that is going to knock the socks off of people, me included. I can't wait for that. It's my most anticipated thing coming out in the near future. And we also have Jedi Survivor, which actually comes out in a couple of weeks. Just some final thoughts. I think it was maybe a poor decision to have the 2 plot-heavy episodes at the very end, and if they're going to tease the mythosaur all the way back in the 2nd episode and then just tease it again in the finale, I don't think that really is purposeful. Were there some great moments in this season? Yes, absolutely. All the action, all of the space battles, they really nailed it and hit a home run. I totally agree with that. But I'm sitting here after watching it questioning the purpose. Why was this season sort of just there? We had this amazing ending with Season 2 where Grogu and Din Djarin get split up, where Grogu is going to go train with Luke Skywalker. And then if you don't watch Book of Boba Fett, you're not going to understand why Din and Grogu are back together. It's sort of just the time jump and disconnected. Was this something that maybe the higher ups at Lucasfilm and Disney wanted to keep Grogu in the story? Because they know Grogu is like the biggest cash cow. I totally get that, and everyone loves to see Grogu, but sort of doing a 180 from where you finished season 2 doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to me. I think the biggest standout from this season is 100% Bo-Katan. I love the character. I was hoping for maybe some dark side twist with her, but at the end of the day, I'm happy they did what they did because she gets to rule Mandalore again, and not necessarily in the way she thought she would, but as a new sort of person. It does also get me super excited for season 4 because now we know we're back to just Din and Grogu together on their own adventures, messing up things in the galaxy. And I feel like that really sets us free and allows us not to be tethered by any sort of past lingering enemies, etc. While we technically could see Moff Gideon return because of all of his clones, and if you notice, he doesn't have a mustache when they kill him, I don't think they're going to do this because it seems like the whole reason for this season was to get everything behind them and start anew. I'm glad the rumors of Din Djarin passing away weren't true. I think it would be a complete disservice to the character, and having a lackluster season with not much interaction between Grogu and Din, having him die would just have been pointless. And I don't want to call this whole season pointless, I just want to say that it feels less impactful. The stakes were definitely lower, and I'm not saying that it was bad by any means. I enjoyed a lot of it, but the stakes felt really low here. You know, introducing Moff Gideon and the Imperials, etc. at the very end, you knew what was going to happen. And with the announcements of a Mandoverse movie, they're not going to kill Din Djarin, let alone Grogu. I do think we're going to see Thrawn very soon, and I'm glad they actually didn't show him in this episode because I want that saved for Ahsoka. He is such a massive character and is really going to be the backbone villain for the rest of the Star Wars universe moving forward, so not showing him here I think was the good call. Most importantly, I need to know what you guys thought about this episode. I'm sort of in the middle. I didn't like a lot of things, but I also did like a lot of things. So let me know down below what you thought, and make sure you leave a like and hit subscribe on your way out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.